Hi, everyone. So I came to agriculture. Well, so I grew up on a farm, as Kim said, or a grazing property, and we've rotationally grazed here for about probably 30 years. And so agriculture has always been a part of my life because of that. I didn't have much of a connection to agriculture, despite it being my entire world early on, because 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 of the environmental impacts, I suppose, or the paradigm that we were farming in didn't really click with me. So it wasn't until I was older and started to discover alternative approaches to doing agriculture than what we had done, and others around in our area, that I started to get really, really interested in agriculture again. And then that led to my PhD looking at regenerative agriculture. And that at that time, so I did my PhD in 2018, and at that time it was that the term had really only started to take off in Australia probably in 2017. And as a result of Charlie Massey's book Call of the Reed Warbler, which lots of people read, how are all these different groups in agriculture interpreting this term regeneration differently? That's what I looked at. And I looked at discourse, which is exploring the language that is used to talk about something. And I came up with 9 discourses of regeneration in agriculture that have different agricultural lineages. So an agroecologist is talking about regeneration potentially differently to the way that a broadacre farmer in Western New South Wales might be talking about regeneration. So that's sort of what I looked at, and that has been the foundation for my work ever since. But I'm more so on that grassroots farmer scale side. I'm a social scientist as well, so looking at social systems on the ground and the movement of regeneration.
Fantastic. And we'll post links to your work in the show notes. Rosie, over to you.
Following that, wow, Ethan, that's fantastic work. Very, very interested to hear more about that. I myself transitioned into agriculture a few years back. I think in a similar way, I was surrounded by farms. I really enjoyed when I studied earth science. I loved the soil element, but I found myself going into a direction of work which was a lot on like electronic consumers, consumer goods. It was a lot of generating things, and it got to a point in my career where it felt like it wasn't the right path for me. And the food industry is this whole sector is fantastic in that, yes, we're creating, but we can regenerate. It can be this circular living, really, where we can do good while we're making goods for people to live a happy, healthy life. So I went into agriculture a few years back, predominantly in the consultancy and also in the carbon accounting side of things, because there was an explosion in people wanting to get their carbon baselines done. And from there is where I joined RAP. And one of the bits I like about RAP, because I think I've transferred further up the supply chain in the way I work with those downstream of farmers mainly, so your manufacturers, your retailers. I had a massive learning curve when I came into agriculture. I don't think I'll ever stop learning. It was absolutely, it's mind-boggling and very exciting and very interesting. And there are so many different elements to agriculture, the culture, the different systems. You can't stop learning. And so for these organizations who are now doing their Scope 3 reporting, agriculture is a huge part of it, because it's that category 1 purchase goods, and it makes up a large portion of emissions. So we have a lot of organizations going through, I'd say, a similar learning curve to the one that I had to make, where we're having to get to grips with agriculture. We're having to learn with and from our farmers, and our farmers are also in the middle of this transition. So it's how we can upskill everyone and pull everyone at the same time into this transition, which is it's a big task, but it's got so many opportunities as well as the challenges. Yeah, I think the first one that I've seen some really positive things recently. So while it's a huge barrier to these big systems transformation, is that competitive landscape. So we are selling goods to consumers. There is going to be that level of competition, but more and more we can't have these sustainable transition areas and innovations and interventions be in that competitive space. If nothing else, consumers are no longer seeing it as a competitive edge. They see it as what you should be doing. So it's losing its advantage as it goes along anyway, as we go further down this path. But what it can do when you come together in these pre-competitive spaces on these pre-competitive issues is you have this united front, which you can go to government with for policy asks. You can go to, you can give confidence to the financial institutions and unlock investment, and also to your supply chain. It's a lot less confusing when we're presenting a united front on various issues. We've seen that recently. We've had a fair few of our farm carbon calculators come together to harmonise their systems with each other, and they're really integrating and learning in that pre-competitive space, which is crucial in the farm data side of things. Like, we all know how much it can affect having these discrepancies when we're doing our primary data collection. We've also had recently we've had a retailer net zero collaborative action programme where retailers in the UK came together to find a way to increase our GHG emission reductions, which are off track at the moment by a significant amount. Most in the UK, for example, we're having to almost double our efforts that we've previously done to get to targets like 50% reduction by 2050. The other one that I'd like to quickly touch on is that transitions and change, like a systems change, have risks associated. And we need to make sure we're spreading out this risk in the supply chain. It can't be all on the producers, for example. And you can do that through many methods, and they can be, incredibly advantageous. Knowledge sharing between different producers. So we're sharing those best practices, also buying contracts, giving farmers the confidence to make transitions, which may have a reduced yield for a period of time, for example. Show that you'll support them through that. I think that that risk is a huge element. If we can mitigate it and reduce it, then these system changes will be a lot more just as well when we do this transition, and it'll scale them up, which is what we need. Just scaling of what we're doing, because a lot of good stuff is already happening, just we need more of it.
Yeah, I think that there's many, when we're talking about systems change, there's like, to do systems change, you've got to do it from every angle. It's so complex. And that's why this feels like a good panel to me. Actually, I was saying beforehand that Rosie and I come from very different ends of this world. So it's nice and complementary. But one thing I'd really like to talk about is values, because I think values are a big part of the systems change that's required, and the cultural change that is required for the sorts of transitions and transformations that we're talking about. And in particular, a type of values called relational values. And relational values are values that emerge from specific relationships. So it might be relationships with a particular place, or with animals, or with a species or a forest. And they're different from two other types of relationships, or to say that better, they sidestep a values dichotomy that exists currently in society, and that is intrinsic values on one end, where nature is inherently valuable outside of human perception of nature. And a lot of environmental organizations have policies based around intrinsic values. National parks come from an intrinsic values foundation. And then there's instrumental values, which is where nature is valuable because of what it can offer human beings and society. And basically, all of our policies virtually are based on instrumental values, and sort of neoliberal market mechanisms and all those things have instrumental values at their base. And it's not that instrumental values are bad. It's just that they are dominating the values world that we have in the West, particularly because relational values have been a very successful values foundation for Indigenous societies all over the world forever. And so a big part of the systems change in my mind is actually starting to bring relational values into our institutions and our policies, and writing policies from a relational values foundation. And that's something at the Institute of Ecological Agriculture we've been trying to do with the organization, but with an accreditation program that we've developed. And it's an accreditation for educators and consultants in regenerative agriculture, but based on relational values. And that's a pilot project at the moment that we're running. Yeah. So that's really important. Other things that in agriculture, specifically from the producer end, if I think about things that may come from a relational values framework that are very beneficial, it's things like, maybe less soil tests, spending money on less soil tests, and spending more money on things like low stress animal handling training and that sort of thing. Because what my research or my research with Oregon State University has been showing us is that a lot of farmers and graziers do not make their decisions based on the hard data that you collect from monitoring ecosystems. They make their decisions from their intuition, from being in these ecosystems for a long time. And that intuition is a powerful thing. It's not a insignificant form of knowledge. And it can be improved, through training and note taking and building those observational skills. So a lot of that sort of stuff has a relational values foundation as well, which is very useful. There's so many things I could say here, because also there was mention about barriers in this question, and there's like so many barriers. One barrier is the stories we tell ourselves, and an example of a story that's a barrier is this idea that industrial agriculture needs to feed the world, or is feeding the world, as opposed to more niche regenerative or ecological approaches, when actually industrial agriculture is only feeding 20% of the global population, and the rest comes from small scale farming. And so it's narratives like that we need to upend. And that is also linked into greenwashing and co-optation of words like regeneration, which is a big problem, either intentionally undertaken by organizations or unintentionally. And what's important here is regenerative agriculture as a movement can easily be used to undermine other agricultural movements, such as agroecology. And agroecology is a really transformative agricultural movement because it has a political framework around food sovereignty. And food sovereignty is all about taking power out of not centralizing power, but distributing it in local communities. So they have decision-making power in food systems, which is pretty inconvenient for corporations that own a lot of food systems power in terms of distribution. And so the reason that regenerative agriculture can undermine that is because it doesn't have such a strong political framework in the same way, but a lot of the same ecological principles. So you can use, for a corporation, it's great because they can jump on the regenerative agriculture bandwagon without having to jump on all of the social change that's required, and dealing with inequity in food systems and Indigenous sovereignty and all those sorts of issues, which are just as important as the ecological issues. So regeneration has to be able to be regenerative in a social sense for the institutions and systems in agriculture, as well as in an ecological sense for the ecosystems. So.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in, especially Ethan, everything you're saying about those different values. It's really exciting actually that it's taking off in the UK. I'm sure in other parts of the world it's more it's been happening as well. And in a way, it's kind of going back to how we used to be, is this approach of landscape management. So it's not just about that food element, it's not about the economic side of things or just the carbon lens, which is a real easy thing to get carbon tunnel vision. I know in my role, a lot of what we're doing is it's our objective, but it cannot be at the detriment to our other, for example, nature and society. And some of the landscape management schemes that I've seen going, there's Lens is one in the UK that's doing great work, for example, is about getting an area and seeing who the stakeholders, as it were, are. And that includes, it's your water companies, it's your, it's local people, it's the producers as well who are creating the food, but it's a lot of different people coming in for a collective good. And I think that especially is able to disseminate some of that. It disseminates responsibility, so it's shared around everyone. It's disseminating risk, and it's also highlighting the other values, which are very important, especially when you're talking to producers. Those are the values that speak to hearts and minds as well. Like, they know if their farm is quieter because there are less birds on it. It's those kind of real, like, they can tell when things are going wrong. So I think when we can combine those, it's incredibly powerful. When it comes to what I will say to people in the audience is, with organizations doing this kind of thing, one of the big bits of advice I would give is getting that internal buy-in, which I know isn't easy, especially when you have, you might have competing or conflicting targets within other parts of the business. You may just be struggling with capacity. That's a huge part of why we made our Scope 3 protocols, was literally just we know there's so much information out there, we will distill it down so you can start on that kind of journey. But also, when you're getting this internal buy-in, at the end of the day, this transition that we're making with agriculture is an existential one. If we don't have a planet where you can grow food, you cannot sell the food. So it's at its core, that is what we're searching for. So it's a piece on education. It's also utilizing the data you have to present these business cases of, if we do this, this is the outcome. So data, I think, is an incredibly powerful tool not to get bogged down in. And I think perfection is the enemy of progress and all that. We have to be using the data if we have it. So what we want our data to be doing is informing our decisions to make the correct ones. And also so we can unlock the correct investment, for example. A lot of the work we do with organizations is them coming to us to talk about, is my data good enough? Is this at the sufficient level to do X, Y, Z? And while we always want to be improving what we're doing, we also want to be acting now. So it is definitely a balancing act, and it's definitely difficult in terms of resource that organizations have, but we can't afford not to.
I would like to jump off the back of what you said, Rosie, was about collective, bring people together around stuff. And that's something that we're working hard to do in the Institute of Ecological Ag as well, because there's a lot of noise, like there's a lot of discourse and language noise and ideological noise out there, and we need to sort of try and sidestep that. And in agriculture, we are not fighting for a different type of agriculture from industrial agriculture. We're fighting for agricultural diversity, because as many places as there is in the world and all the different contexts, we need different types of agriculture for all of those contexts. And so it's not regenerative agriculture or organics or agroecology or permaculture or biodynamics or holistic management or any of those things. It's all of those things as the alternative to the industrial regime. So that's really important. And the issue here is that there's so many tensions between a lot of those different movements, finger pointing, and it's very easy to undermine the movement by creating those tensions. So we need to try and get away from that. And the way we get away from that, I think, is through our relationships with each other in the different contexts that we're in. Because relationships, if you can establish respectful relationships and good create spaces where people can actually listen to each other, it's easy to sidestep a lot of the ideological noise and the mess, and people are able to empathize with each other more and see the value in achieving the needs of other people as well as their own. So that's really important. And regeneration is all about relationships. We are regenerating relationships in the landscape, water cycles, carbon cycles, biodiversity. Those landscape functions are all different types of relationships. We're regenerating our relationship with landscapes, between people and landscapes, which needs a lot of regenerating. And that comes back to the relational values piece. And we're regenerating relationships in our social relationships with each other. Then that is the piece on equity in agriculture and building strong, healthy communities, rural communities, urban communities. And one thing else I would really like to say, which I think is a super important point, which would be good to end on here, is that regenerative agriculture is spoken about as if it's a noun or a thing increasingly. And it has a set of practices, or it is a practice. And my take on that is that it is not a practice and cannot be compared to other things like agroecology for that reason. What regenerative agriculture is the concept of regeneration applied to agriculture, just like it's being applied to tourism or economics or health or other sectors as well, because there is a broader regenerative movement beyond agriculture. That helps us sidestep this regenerative agriculture against agroecology, for example, because they're things. But actually, agroecology is a very good way of regenerating agriculture, particularly with food sovereignty framework. So it's a paradigm shift. And I often like to talk, instead of talking about regenerative agriculture, talk about regenerating agriculture, because that's what we're actually trying to do. That's a great question. And one thing I would like to say there is that regenerative agriculture, like a lot of agricultural movements, comes completely from the global north, which is problematic, I think, for its transformative potential. And agroecology is something that has emerged predominantly from the global south, and it's one of the few as well that has such a strong footing in the global south. So honestly, in terms of transforming food systems, the partnership between regeneration and agroecology is super, super important. What you could have if you focus too much on regenerative agriculture and that global north context is a situation where, in the global north, you've got all these beautiful regenerative farms and it's all lovely, and there's probably, not a whole lot of production, but the production pressure is just being transferred to the global south, which is industrializing to meet increased demand. So if the movements do not speak to each other in the south and the north, then it's not going to be very, very likely not going to be transformative.
We've just had a report come out about how water is one of the areas that we, when we have water pressure strains, we just send it abroad, we'll import. It could become a very similar situation where any of these pressures, we'll just import it. So when we're looking at how to tackle this, there is firstly the fact that you need to listen to what the practices are in that area. I think that is one of a really tricky balancing point with regenerative agriculture is if it becomes prescriptive in a way, are you going to go to a location and impose practices that may not suit that location? So in that sense, it's really important we understand the context of the agriculture that we're going in. There is also a real possibility that divestment might happen, and we'll just get carbon leakage when we see, if there are areas of our supply chain which are not transitioning in the way we want them to, they're not having that systems change. Instead of putting in the time and effort and resources, we will take our business elsewhere. That is a real risk in terms of importing, it feels a lot easier to do as well, especially when we have quite complex supply chains. So I think it's a bit of a two-pronged, like making sure that divestment doesn't become the norm and we just move our problem elsewhere, and also that we understand the context that we're going into when we're talking to our, other country. And also it's an amazing time to learn. I'm from the northwest of England, where we have clay soils, and it's not really comparable to sandy soils down in the south of England, but there are different areas of the world where we have very similar settings. So actually we may not be able to learn from areas in other parts of the UK, but there'll be other areas in Europe, for example, where we can take learnings. So while it's also looking at, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing, we also want to take learnings from farms around the world. There are many, many situations where we could be sharing this learning.
There was a paper that came out of the UK by George Cusworth that talked about the McDonaldization of regenerative agriculture, which is exactly what you're talking about. Just this one idea just spread across the entire world and scaled, when actually, which could, undermine transformative agricultures that are already taking place in these places. So regeneration does need to come from the people and the ecosystems in particular places. Yeah, I think that urban, peri-urban agriculture, it's super viable. In fact, I think it's going to be way more important than some of the models that we have at the moment going forward. And we can produce a lot of food that way. 40%, I'm sure this is the statistic, 40% of the food that fed the Allies in World War II came from backyard gardens.
Wow.
So there's a lot of stuff that you can produce, and you can create ecosystems in these urban contexts, and lots of different microclimates for different types of ecosystems that can be really productive. Whereas out in regional Australia, where we're growing our wheat and cotton, we're just bulldozing entire ecosystems in order to do that on large industrial scales, these monocultures. And it's just absolutely not sustainable. So the regenerative solutions for cropping are particularly tricky. And from my perspective, one solution to that is investing way more in the small scale peri-urban agricultural sectors, and building them up. And it's more, it creates more accessibility to agriculture for people. There's more jobs in agriculture. There's just like endless benefits. People are more connected to ecosystems in their area. There's endless benefits to it.
Yeah, social capital, community building, all of the above, as you say. And I guess it might be hard for retailers to use those models, Rosie, because there's not the economies of scale. It's complex and diverse. Yeah, any thoughts on that? Not that it has to go through dominant retail models, but what's your...
It's interesting because I think it can help, perhaps not directly, but retailers, as we all have the huge issue of how much like food waste we have. So if food waste, there are countries where it's a lot better, and I think it's a lot to do with that culture, and like you were saying, Ethan, about the people being disconnected from the land, and it is that level of Australia and the UK are on the higher side of the food waste, and it's one of those that if we can tackle that side of things, which includes the urban agriculture, includes those smaller things, getting people more connected, an understanding and a respect for food, which is lacking, I think, in a lot of places, could do massive amounts to reduce our food waste in like globally. If food waste was its own country, it would be the third largest emitter in the whole world. So it's and over half of that, this obviously varies a lot from country to country, but over half of that is food waste in the household. And there's also food waste in that supply chain where we can reduce as well. But if we start with just building back those relationships between people, food, the earth, it's that kind of thing that while it may not directly help retailers in that sense, they also are looking to reduce that food waste. It's one of those, like we're saying, the different values. It's one of those different values, and it would be hugely impactful for our emissions as well. It would be, you know, if you only eat what you buy, that's also less strain on producing. So it could be a really big solution, and it's also lovely. It's really nice to, you know, get your hands dirty in the soil. So it's a real win-win if we can do it in the right way.
I think that that's the biggest challenge, because we have all the solutions. You know, and there is also a power element that we need to overcome. You know, if we're going to actually change a system, then some people are going to lose out. Obviously, they don't want that. So that's an issue as well. But yeah, it's all social that's holding change back. Yeah, and I don't have all the answers in terms of how to actually change behaviors necessarily. Yeah.
I guess the new paradigm, the regenerative movement in itself, is a positive sign that there is change afoot.
Yeah, I often think about, we need to because it takes time, you know, to change the way you see the world, and that is what we're working with, and so we need to hurry up and go slowly, you know, to make those changes, and it's really personal, because the most transformative thing any of us can do is regenerate our own relationship to the world that we're living in, you know, and our livelihoods, which there's varying capacity to do that within individual households, but that's really the heart of it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of the inner development goals and how there's new movement beyond external sustainability to develop ourselves and our values and our ways of being and relating and thinking. Something that, I think is super important as well, because as you say, it is personal. It starts with us, and from there we can make change possible.
Exactly. Yeah. What does it mean in each of our contexts to take responsibility for our relationship to our family, to our neighbors, to the food system that we're a part of, to the past, take responsibility for our relationship to the present and to the future? These are all the kinds of questions that each of us need to ask ourselves, I think. Yeah.
I think there's also that education piece in literally with diets, for example. We have a lack of knowledge surrounding how to use our pulses and lentils. You know, if we think of waste, most waste is in your salad leaves and vegetables. So is that a knowledge piece where we could be helping inform people how to cook in certain ways, how to use certain foodstuffs. So there is that rebuilding culture also, by sharing that knowledge, by building the capacities of the people.
Having ecological literacy as well, like building, which I know has been a topic of a previous or to be session of these, but yeah, educating people to be able to look out at the world, the natural world, and see it. How do people see it when they look at it? And there's definitely a lot for everyone to learn in terms of identify a healthy ecosystem.
I can quickly jump in on, especially when it comes to farmers and their time and how many of these data requests they're getting. Like, we are improving all the time on, for example, satellite imagery for those kind of areas. So it's a toss up between getting data that's valuable without overloading, you know, requests. And also these things do cost money. So it's how we, you know, reduce the resource ask and the monetary ask, while also, as you say, like soil carbon sequestration is a huge area of potential. That there are things that we should be measuring to show the effect that we've done, and to evidence further interventions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of really positive stuff happening in that space. There's like a whole new economy emerging around natural capital and carbon farming and all sorts of things. And there's many hurdles still to jump with that and designing that. But there's also lots of really positive benefits, ecological benefits that have directly come out of it. And I'm not so much in that space. I'm more on the social side, but sometimes when I feel utter grief for the things that are going on, some of the good news stories have come out of this new natural capital economy in terms of, a forest that didn't get cut down or something like that. And I think, well, thank goodness, it's easy to say that, there's lots of, it's complicated and there's lots of bad stuff there and it's the wrong direction. But in terms of quick reaction time to the crisis that we're in, there's some good stuff happening. But what my warning would be with that whole sector is that let's not fall into the trap of only ever valuing nature instrumentally now that we have a more sophisticated mechanism for valuing natural capital in those instrumental ways. Let's not forget about the role that relational values and intrinsic values still have to play in that picture, because they do have a big role to play. And it's a governance thing as well. You can't genuinely integrate Indigenous and First Nations perspectives into a model that is only based on instrumental values and valuing natural capital in that way. So it needs to be broader.
So I'm going to offer Rosie and Ethan you the opportunity to share any final reflections or passing thoughts.
I'd just round off with saying this is an incredibly challenging area. If we knew all the answers, we'd have done it already, but the best time to start was yesterday. Second best time is now. So it's just get stuck into this incredibly complex but incredibly exciting opportunity that we have as we transition our agriculture.
And I can only second that. And this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone on the call has enjoyed it as well. Yeah,
me too. Yeah, we live in the age of consequences. That there will be consequences, and that's never a reason to not do something, because doing something is more fun and more meaningful than not doing something.
Well, there's a great quote actually, and I can't remember it word for word, and I can't remember who said it, but it goes something like, hope isn't the certainty that something's going to turn out right. It's the certainty that what you're doing makes sense regardless of how things turn out. That's the beauty of this space and the work that we're doing, is it does make sense and it's important, and regardless of what happens, it's important that we do it.